Welcome everybody to the demand generation panel at Heavybit. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Tom Tunguz and I'll be your host tonight. I am a partner at Redpoint Ventures. I've been there for about 8 years. I invest in and focus on early stage software companies. And I write a blog at tomtunguz.com. And I just wrote a book with Frank Bien, who's the founder and CEO of Looker. And tonight we have 3 wonderful guests. We have Kiyoto from Treasure Data, who is a huge macaroni and cheese fan. Nisha, who used to be at PagerDuty, is now advising startups, and she is fascinated by traffic. And Craig at Citus Data, who lives in Albany, but not in Albany, New York. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about a topic that every as-a-service company cares an enormous amount about because it is the most important driver of growth, and that is demand generation. One of the things that I've seen as an investor is that demand generation teams are structured differently at different companies. And so maybe we can kick things off by just talking about how have you each seen demand generation structured in your respective roles, and what are the pros and cons that you see of that structure?
So here at Treasure Data, so I lead marketing team of about 8 people now, and demand gen is done inside marketing. But one thing where I think we're a little unusual is marketing own up until what we call the first meeting or discovery meeting, which is the meeting between our sales staff and a prospect customer. And again, we're like enterprise B2B SaaS, so almost all of our customers go through that process of speaking to our sales staff, speaking to our sales engineers, and so forth. And we eventually converged to this setup because so much of demand gen relies on the outcome. That is usually not 100% inside marketing, but usually in sales. So very typical, back and forth hot potato is, we did this paid search ad, but they drove the wrong traffic. Well, if we were driving the wrong traffic, especially if you're trying to get someone on the phone to speak with us, we'll know before we pass the lead to the sales team. And we've seen it work better than we're going to deliver these leads in the pipeline, and it's all just numbers, and we don't know if it, the real conversations that happen. So that's my take. I'm trying to gauge the audience's familiarity with marketing lingo. So if I'm just talking about a lot of jargon stuff, I'll let you know.
I've seen demand gen structured a little differently on a few different axes. One, does demand gen itself own a bunch of different functions that are all designed to create demand? So top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, what stage the buyer's at. I've also seen demand gen be broken up where a part of demand gen is in sales, a part of demand gen is in marketing, a part of demand gen might even be in product, partially because of this example. It ends up being an ecosystem. In my own organization.
Can the panel ask questions?
Of course.
I'm curious right there. The top of the funnel versus bottom of the funnel, kind of where some of those lives. What are some of those actual activities, and how do they differ on top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, whether they're in sales or marketing?
Yeah, top of the funnel, I generally mean things that you're not directly relating to the last click or the last action that got them into the sales pipeline. And also awareness, things that are driving awareness of what you do or getting people to consider you before they are actually ready to educate themselves and consider. And bottom of the funnel would be functions like an SDR or a trial or getting them into I'm actually ready to see your product specifically.
So the latter half living sometimes in the sales side, more so top of the funnel, more in marketing.
Yep. What was that? SDR, the sales development rep. The person who, and so there you often have these teams that are in between sales and marketing, so to speak, that are qualifying leads and making sure they're actually ready for sales, because oftentimes you actually need a person to do that. It can't be automated.
There's a great book called Predictable Revenue that walks through all this.
Check
it out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was asking questions as I was supposed to be answering.
It's all right. We won't hold it against you.
So I've commonly seen it traditionally within marketing. Sometimes I think a similar split on some of the bottom of the funnel activities living in sales. I've also seen different splits where, depending on the activity and the channel, determined where it lived within marketing. So a lot of kind of top of the funnel, just general awareness, thought leadership, launches living in product marketing, traditional kind of like ad spend and just like click through stuff, living in more squarely kind of a demand gen section within marketing. I think what's, to me, the more interesting part is less of where does the overall kind of demand gen live, because it can spread across marketing, and more of who do you best align to, of like, are you more aligned with sales and delivering a set number of leads, or is it more about overall awareness and growth? Is it more about the product launches, and kind of where do you create that alignment? Which I've not seen that within a single company spread in multiple ways. So I've seen whether it's webinars, awareness, or leads, that spread throughout marketing and sales, but I've not seen it spread across, do you more integrate with sales or product or engineering?
Yeah, that makes sense. Like the way I've seen it, like sometimes, or what I've actually observed in startups is the smaller the ACV, the more the demand generation team looks like a growth hacking team, right? And it's basically a lot of quantitative optimization about different parts of the user funnel, the conversion funnel. And as the ACVs or the price points of the product grow, then it kind of skews, it evolves from marketing in that function and goes more into sales. And the demand generation function there is really to support the account executive who is really responsible for, the sales development rep tees up the leads, and then the account executive closes the accounts. Is that pretty consistent with what you guys, would you agree?
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
It also makes me think about this other idea of who's the person responsible for which problem.
Yeah.
Because your marketing organization and your company can have several opportunities to go address across the marketing and sales funnel. So who's responsible for which problem, and that helps with the alignment piece, and also what is your problem? Is your problem ACV? Is it volume? Is it conversion? And that, we say demand gen, but what does that really mean? I think it's different by company also. And so who has to solve it, and who should they be aligned with? And I'm okay with org structure changes. I've only been in organizations where they literally move people around all the time. So I'm very comfortable with that and would say embrace that too. Maybe for 6 months you're aligned a certain way to solve one problem, and then you need to shift.
But at the end of the day, the demand generation function is really all about, I think it's one number, which is marketing qualified leads.
Yeah.
Right? And they're in order to align all the different functions inside of a company around this MQL, you have to come up with a definition of what it is, right? And every company is going to have a different definition of an MQL. Kiyoto, have you guys had this conversation internally about what is an MQL? Yeah. And what is sales inputs? What's your input? How do you view it?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the big thesis that I have, which is demand gen people should really be involved, not just with the process, but also the product, so that they know where what kind of customers are good customers and why. And this goes back to this, how do you define MQL? So usually there's periodic check-in between the sales and marketing leadership. It's those are the good leads, those are the bad leads, those are good meetings, and you organically evolve and try to settle for binary or quantifiable criteria. The important thing, though, is that before you get to that phase, you develop a good rapport between, or if you're running a company, you make sure that the sales leadership and the marketing leadership can really have an honest conversation. It's you and I both know this is a good lead, and not because we have this KPI thing and we need to shift numbers, right? Because only then you can really talk about, here's our product, and it's always the product first. Here's a customer pain, and we're solving it well. So this is a really good lead. So now let's try to translate that into something that SDRs and AEs can communicate clearly, and leave a very clear record of this was a good lead and this was a bad lead. Sometimes this translates into lead scores, and oftentimes it's just a set of criteria that you sort of compose together.
Yeah. Chris, do you have a different point of view?
I agree on several things there. A shared terminology, super important. The one thing I actually don't have a good answer for is we actually have a kind of split channel. We have a enterprise offering we've had for 4 years, and now we have an as-a-service offering.
Okay.
And what does a marketing qualified lead
look
like?
The as-a-service is, so the enterprise is for very high price
very
points,
high.
And then the as-a-service is self-sign up with a credit card?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we actually have open source as well.
Okay.
So I haven't seen many examples of those those three all existing in one.
Yeah.
I would say like we're still struggling with, what does a marketing qualified lead look like for the self-service?
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of people that come, sign up, I don't hear from for 2 months, and then come back and then give me a credit card. And I'm like, wait, we haven't talked to you. You're not a marketing qualified lead. You can't give us money.
Yeah.
That's not how this works. So I think it very much depends, and this comes back to some of your earlier point on like, what does the ACV look like per deal?
Yeah.
And it very much changes there. And how do you actually score a lead based on the dollars that come in? And when they are self-service, which is, I think, for developer-focused companies, a very interesting kind of starting point. You treat them completely different than you do a traditional marketing qualified lead.
Yeah.
Now, how do you score them? There's other ways and other means, and a completely separate kind of set of things you focus on, like documentation, self-onboarding, that kind of stuff. But you can still use some of the same things of like, what did they come in and do? How have they interacted? Like, you can score them in similar ways. At least to date, I haven't been able to score them apples to apples, though.
Yeah. Are you measured? Is your performance measured on MQLs? Like, is that your goal or your OKR or whatever you use internally?
We're not actively tracking that relative to other things right now.
Yeah.
I have a number, so I'm responsible for the cloud side and then some of the marketing stuff.
Yeah.
So I kind of have the dual hat there.
Yeah.
So not necessarily. I think if we end with the right deals, which at some point it very much may be like, how many are we passing off to sales and where is that responsibility? But for right now, because we're smaller and more agile, it's very much of that partnership of like, if we're doing the right things, closing the right deals, working together, it doesn't matter on a set quota necessarily.
Yeah. And how big is the company you work for?
We're at 25 people.
25. Oh yeah. Okay. So
a little smaller.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So, Nisha, how well understood? Like, demand generation can be this amorphous word, right? And how well understood is great demand generation understood within a company? What are the most, like you've advised lots of companies. What are the misconceptions that most people have about demand generation?
The biggest is probably that it's a one-trick pony, and all you really need to do is start generating marketing qualified leads, and they just that thing just exists out there, and you're just fishing for them. I think this conversation we're having before around what is it? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is your buyer's path? How is sales actually going to move them forward if they're sales? If it's as a service, how are you going to know, or self-service, how are you going to know that you're actually doing the right thing? All of that matters before you start saying, hey, we need to go solve demand gen. Because demand gen is really multifaceted and it changes all the time. So like going back to this thing about marketing qualified lead, if you don't know what that is and it's changing, your demand gen definition might actually be changing as often or throughout the growth of the company. And in the early days, I don't stop calling it demand gen and call it like, I need to go solve this problem. And it happens to be a marketing discipline, or probably a marketing person is probably going to solve this problem for me.
So what does that look like? So I'm a founder. I've come up with this great new database or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And we're 7 people, and I'm the CEO, and there are 6 engineers. And now that we've got seemingly product market fit, I want to go out and scale and get lots of customers, right? This is the first thing I do, go and hire somebody who's got a demand generation in their title to build up the lead list.
Yeah, I think people with demand gen experience are important as long as when you're talking with them, they've had to solve the problems at your stage.
Okay.
Meaning there isn't a defined market of people that are constantly looking for a solution, because oftentimes there is no set wording for the solution yet, right? So you can't just say, I'm going to go pay Google X millions of dollars and I'm going to find all these people. What the demand gen person has to do at that stage is figure out why people are either finding you on their own or what's going to make them interested enough to come talk to you. And that is a very different function.
They're finding
than
a
if you
hook.
scale.
Right?
Yeah, that's a very different function than when, okay, now you need to generate 2,000 leads a month. So somebody who's done the building or has the intellectual curiosity to go figure out what the engine has to even look like before you can scale it.
Yeah. And what are you looking for if I'm going to go out, I'm that CEO, I want to go out and find that person. What do they look like?
Oh, people ask me all the time, recommend someone. Like, there's only a few people. Intellectual curiosity. They are really interested in testing and learning, because I fully believe there's no playbook. Otherwise, I would be too wealthy to be here. Like, you have to learn it every single time. So.
And it changes. Every time it changes. Like what worked 18 months ago is not going to work now. Like
Yeah.
it's completely different based on not even just the product difference and the market difference, but like what worked then won't work now.
Yeah.
Because
So
your
somebody's
product's
also-
changing, the market's evolving. So if you know that a channel at some point your current AdWords campaign is going to fall flat or not be as productive, when do you develop alternative strategies? Like, do you wait until the vein, you've totally saturated that customer acquisition channel, and then start anew, or do you invest early? How do you think about that?
I don't. There's no time. I think that's a feeling. I really
It's a
think that's
feeling?
you're watching your business grow, and I think one of the important things about having people early in your company is developing a sense for how your business actually works and talking to customers. But I think when you start building channels really early, the first one or two, you're so focused on, you're not stepping back and saying, well, how big is my world?
Yeah.
Is my universe 10x, 100x, hopefully, such that this sliver is only going to get me 9 months?
Yeah.
If I keep doing this, I'm actually tapped out in 9 months.
Yeah.
That's the time frame at which you say, okay, I'm going to need at least a couple of months to go learn the new channel.
Yeah.
And do I have to hire someone? Is that another couple of months?
Yeah.
So all of a
That's-
sudden your planning cycle's 6 months ahead, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the biggest things I worry about when I like find a message I want to test with a particular channel. I want the message to not be as good as my perfect message because I don't want to mess it up the first time on the channel. Like I want to basically practice getting the channel right
Yeah.
and then go with the right message and scale that and have a bigger impact.
Yeah.
So there's the mix of figuring out the right message plus the right channel, and then you kind of want to maximize both of those.
Yeah. Kiyoto, how many channels do you guys manage? Do you have a sense, like order of magnitude? Is it 5? Is it
Interesting.
10? Is it 50?
It's probably dozens at the highest
Dozens,
level.
yeah.
Like some of it is technical, and one of the things I was going to say was, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but marketing is increasingly like a nerdy art now, right? It's no longer about coming just up with creative, punchy copy. I mean, that's still a big part of it, but especially early on, and this is like more like in retrospect, I should have totally hired like an analyst first who could lay out a very solid foundation and also reason quantitatively both at the granular level but also like high level. Like if we're gonna keep doing this, these channels, are we gonna tap out, or is there like extra room for optimization? Are we getting the right type of customer, which usually means connecting like into various APIs and all that stuff. And they might not be your best engineers, but they need to be self-sufficient because early on, the most demand gen headcount you can get is like 1, right? So long story short, like it's like 10, 15, but always like there are a few that we know to be reasonably working, and a few that I try to give like my team like, you know, some spaces to, you can spend this much money, try this and try that. And my take on this is don't give up if your first like 12 ideas didn't work. Because the 13th one might work. You need to keep trying.
Have you ever had a channel that never worked? Like no matter what you tried, you just couldn't squeeze any juice from the lemon?
Event marketing in the wrong market. So going to conferences when you don't know if your buyers are there yet. So like, for example, if you're like database or infrastructure vendor, it's very, very tempting to go to a very horizontal event where all the technology providers gather. Because at that point, it's a matter of who gets the best air cover. And you usually don't have the customer story as compelling. And you just end up like sort of spending like 10K here, 10K there, 10K here, 10K there. And before you know it, you've exhausted your marketing spend. We did a bit of that early on, but I think we course corrected early enough. And we're trying to be a lot more thoughtful about which event to go. And another thing to think about is if you go to events and if you're like early stage, you as CEO will be at the booth, like hard selling. And it's very tiring. It's a lot of time. It takes like a week out of your, life when you might want to talk to like 20 customers through like Skype calls. So do think about your time as like a very limiting resource if you do event marketing early on.
So as you scale your team and the company, how do you think your role and your function are going to change?
I mean, my background is as much of kind of running a cloud service as anything. Like I'm not a marketer by trade at all. So I mean, my hope is I actually find someone to take care of some of that because there's a lot of coordination there. The hard part is being in a very developer-focused, engineering-driven company. How do you have a marketer come in that can work with the rest of the engineering, the product leadership, the sales leadership, and kind of coexist with all that?
Yeah.
It was a thing I saw at a few companies over and over that were strong, like developer-focused, developer-led. Like at the end of the day, there becomes this kind of tension of, are you a product-first company or a marketing-first company? Meaning, like, when you ship something, is it fully available and live, or do you announce something and then it comes 6 months later?
Okay, which one's which? So, yeah, go ahead.
So are you a product company, meaning like I ship something and like someone can sign up and use it on that day?
Okay.
Marketing company, I won't name any, but like you can guess, like here's a major announcement and this is available in 6 months. Have they built it? Are they figuring it out? Like,
Doesn't matter.
The latter has somewhat of a negative opinion with engineering, and it tends to evolve over time that marketing will set a date and they say have it ready.
Yeah.
It's not ready,
Yeah.
but they do the launch anyways, and then engineers still figuring out what they're building as marketing's launching it.
Have you worked for a marketing-driven company in the past?
Yes.
And was it painful?
To the engineers, yes.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I don't think I ever have. I want to go see what that looks like. Marketing.
Marketing. I mean, customers too. Like you market to that, and the customers know what they're getting, and it's a different type of product, right? I think it's typically not developer-focused products.
Yeah.
So to be fair, like I don't think there's a lot of like people listening and here in the room that are in those type of situations, but they do exist. And there is always that tension, and I think enough developers have worked at companies that have felt burned by that, so that they're wary of it.
Yeah.
So I mean, for me, I would love to hand off a ton of the marketing responsibility and focus on more of the cloud as a service business.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm also protective of that because I know what comes along with the engineers.
Yeah.
That was a long-winded way of completely dodging your question.
At least you're honest about it. So, how do you find the right culture fit, right, Nisha? I mean, you've worked with lots of companies. Like, they ask you really hard questions like, hey, can you refer somebody? Because obviously you're really well connected in the ecosystem. Like in a developer-focused company, a marketer has to have a head of marketing has to have a different DNA. And one of the questions that we often get from founders is, there are basically two different functions of a head of marketing, right? One is the storytelling, brand building part, and then the other part is the demand generation, quantitative part. And there are probably 2 or 3 people in the world who have mastered both.
Yep.
And then there's lots of people who are masters of one discipline or another. And so which one do I prioritize, right? How do I as a founder make that decision about relative priorities?
So a couple of quick things. I actually think there's 3 jobs in the role, and I've experienced this in every single one of my roles, even as an advisor. You're doing the demand gen thing, you're doing the product marketing thing, and you're the educator inside the company as to what you do. Because
And
if you
what do you mean by product marketing, the second one?
So for me, product marketing is how you're going to communicate what it is, what problems you solve, who the buyer is, who cares inside your target companies, what's the pricing and packaging. So where's that connection point?
Yeah.
Where you know that you've hit the right ecosystem, and demand gen is the vehicle, at least in my organizations, that go and make the engine actually work.
That's the
So
execution part,
you actually know the car's on the right track,
Yeah.
and now you're making sure it can go as fast as possible. And in that third role, the educator inside the company, you will fail every time if you can't find a way to do that. Like this problem between marketing and other organizations, the fact that it comes up now with engineering and developers is, I think, because of so many companies that are developer focused.
Yeah.
You see it there, but you actually see it in every single department.
So what does that mean, internal education? Like what is that?
What's the role of marketing? Right, so we'll use these words, marketing, demand gen, product marketing. What does it actually mean to the people that care? What does it mean to the sales leader? What does it mean to the engineering leader? What does it mean to product management? Because product management and product marketing in my worlds are 2 sides of the same coin. If they're not joined at the hip, like things don't work this launch thing is a great example. So who do you need to go work with to explain what your role is relative to their world and how you help, or what you need from them? Because it's going to change over time, but it'll be different also by department.
Yeah.
And so marketing, I think one of the things that I love about it and the things that I hate about it is that it is in the center of a lot of things often. Going to market, researching market, pricing and packaging. What do you do with adding new channels? Do you have partnerships or not? Marketing always gets involved either in a supporting role or driving role.
Yeah.
And because it's so nuanced, you can end up being like, well, I don't know what you do.
Yeah.
Right?
And
And
I
that's
think,
the first
yeah,
one.
I would completely agree that third pillar there is super important. One of my favorite things to do was to go rotate between teams, both on the product side and on the marketing side. Of every 6 weeks, once a week I have a meeting where I'm sitting down with a different team, whether it's sales, whether it's the product team, whether it's the engineers, like asking what they need from me and what I can do for them. The results of it were pretty interesting in that a lot of people were volunteering to help marketing in their unique way, right? So if they understood what marketing meant uniquely to them, not to the organization as a whole, it was much more personal.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you've got these 3 different functions, right? One of the challenges I see in heads of marketing, particularly in the demand generation function, is creating a career path for people who start out, particularly in the SDR role. Like, it's a role that it's very intense, right? You've got a quota that you've got to hit every month, and it's a role that, like, after a certain period of time, people become tired of, right? Or it doesn't necessarily lend itself to, like, yeah, you can manage a team of SDRs and that kind of thing. But how do you think about? Are you yet at the point where you're thinking about career paths for people in the demand generation function?
Yeah. So again, this goes back to the thing. I think the best demand gen people for startups have great potential to become product marketing person. Because for you to really, like, and so again, the term demand gen is used very loosely, but the person that goes and figures out the first, like, 1 or 2 channels where you start to see, like, the promise of, like, okay, if I do 5 times as much of this, we're going to get 5 times as much revenue. The person who can actually figure that out for very early innovative product at startup, they probably have, like, that product market sense. And I don't know, maybe this is just my impression, but, like, product marketing seems to be, like, the cool job inside most marketing organizations. Like, when I ask a lot of CMOs, like, how they got to becoming a CMO or, like, VP of marketing, they usually they were a product marketing person at one point. So I do see that career path. Some people want to really master the art and the craft of optimization marketing and demand gen, and, like, really, like, I can make this demand gen thing work for any stuff that found its, like, product market fit. But if they want to go up the career ladder of marketing, I would have them try, like, launch a product or go work more, like, closely with the product people and see if they have potential there. Again, like, becoming a product person has its own set of challenges, but they probably have the right intuition, at least for your product, if they manage to open that first channel.
Terrific, great. Let's shift now to audience questions. Does anyone have a question for our wonderful panelists? One of the best demand generation teams I've ever seen was at Zendesk, and they're now at Duo Security. And there's a guy there whose name is Jeff Wiss. And he, the Zendesk team, like, I think the Zendesk team, and Bill Masitis, who used to be the CMO there, he was closely paired with Jeff. And the big thing that they really focused on was they viewed marketing as having 9 different disciplines. One of them was demand generation. And they also viewed demand generation as hand in hand with customer success, right? And the goal of the organization, they basically said, if the product is good enough, if the product is excellent that it makes our users happy, and the customer support is superb, we're going to get a lot of referrals through our customers. And it turned out, in fact, that the customer success and the product marketing people who are doing lifecycle marketing as customers were really able to kind of inculcate or aggregate this group of zealots for Zendesk who consistently referred large numbers of customers to the point that it actually materially reduced cost of customer acquisition. And I thought that was probably one of the most innovative ways of thinking about demand generation, was how do you take your existing customer base and use them to do demand generation, right?
The first one that came to mind was Zendesk and HubSpot. And what's interesting about, I think, the answer is that I can't find one consistent way of having done it, right?
Yeah.
Zendesk is a really unique example, which makes it really great. HubSpot could do what they did because of what they were selling to who they were selling to. In other companies I've seen, there's sort of like micro examples of things they just did amazingly well. So I do think it's different by that, but those two come to mind.
One that comes to mind for me that's maybe a little more unique, I think, at least in the Valley, because it's not necessarily open source, is Redgate. So if you're not familiar, they build like tools for DBAs for SQL Server. And they had a trial version, kind of, I think, maybe a free version that was more limited. One, they built a great product, but they very much built kind of a land and expand model where they tracked every person that used it, and then they would send a sales guy in after the fact. So I think like one key of demand gen is like actually tracking your metrics, what's working, what's not. So like it was coupled with the rest of the org, but by basically like giving it away, tracking how much their impact was in an org, then they would come in and sell the CTO, the CIO of, you have 20 people using it, and I don't know of a SQL Server DBA that doesn't use Redgate at all. So I think like to be able to say, every kind of installation of it we've sold as a tools company, that's pretty big overall.
Account-based marketing, the buzzword of the day.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is a really demand gen topic, but if you haven't already, like I would really come up with like a model of, I'm gonna make this much money from this many customers, and this is feasible because there's this many of these customers. And I think that, and the reason why I'm saying that really dictates more than anything whether you should really pursue account-based approach. Because like, let's say you're selling just to major financial companies. There's this like database company called KX, and they sell just to major investment banks, right? And I think at that point, you have no choice but to do account-based selling. Whereas like if you're like, let's say like GitHub, well, all the developers are your potential lead source. And at that point, it's really about figuring out what type of developer should I go after and really think about on an individual basis. So it's not really an answer, but before like thinking about the tactics of acquiring new customers, I would think about like the overall universe that you operate in, and that kind of decides what's the optimal path.
Yeah, for me, I think about them disconnected, as one is not the next step to the other, but the persona will always exist. Account base is based on what size of target customer you're going to go after, because like you were saying, the volume may not allow you to do that, and in that case, it wouldn't make sense. But for the enterprise game, you might want to know both the persona and the account, and figure out which persona to go after first, versus influencer and decision maker, people that are hard to get versus people you can actually reach.
Yeah, I'd echo that. And basically, when you're going at the account base, you've basically got to tackle multiple personas most likely, because it is a bigger ACV account. You've got to use multiple kind of messages and channels, and kind of just be prepared to do a lot. And like the goal is to still, I would say, to get them inbound, because I don't know if it's 5x, 10x, 20x more likely. Like inbound is going to close more than any sort of cold outbound. You need to do them all in concert, but the goal is still to kind of attack them from multiple channels, from the right persona, so that if they can come inbound, it's much, much better. At the same time, you'll start to employ more tactics as you scale up, but it's not necessarily a how do I get to this point that's in concert with everything else you're doing.
Yeah, I think it's more sales. Like if you're moving up market and you've gone from SMB to mid market, and now you're going after named accounts, the way I've seen it is it's more sales driven. It's like, okay, the sales team has hired a bunch of outside account execs, and they have a big quota, and the way they're going to hit that quota, because the company's decided that's the right strategy, is to go after the list of these 50 accounts. And then it's marketing who comes in with the supporting materials and the tactics to acquire those customers, educate those customers, and then the AE ultimately closes the deal. That's more of what I've seen. It's probably not universal, but.
And also, I think if you need like multiple decision makers to approve the purchase, you probably have to do some kind of account-based selling, because it looks much better if the same account executive really owns the account and build a relationship with different stakeholders, delivering different messages.
How you navigate. I think like the exercise I'm thinking about is sitting in a room with my demand gen leader, my product marketing leader, like whoever is the core team, saying, well, where are these people? What are they doing? What makes them think about this product set at the moment when they're most likely to go click on something or sign up on their own? At PagerDuty, we did this a lot because we were trying to catch the wave of a company that was growing mostly organic inbound. So marketing was just the product, and we're trying to be marketers to change the inflection point. We spent a lot of time early on talking with customers, saying what is it that you're doing when you think about these problems, and where are you, and then where do you go to understand it better? And oftentimes, the customer is not saying the words you want them to use, but they're hitting on all these adjacent things that make you realize, oh, you know what, partnerships is actually really interesting for us because it always comes up when this happens. Or, content always comes up as a big question. What content do we write? Well, what are they reading and what problem do they think about in relation to your product? I think the only way to narrow down the list, because you're right, there's a ton, is to say, my bet is these first 10 are where we should start. And maybe when you get through the first 5, you're like, well, we actually learned something. Our hypothesis was totally wrong, so let's go over to the next 10. And I don't think there's a substitute for trying and learning. There's just no way, and there's probably some hidden insights that you'll learn when you make that bet on the first 10.
Yeah, try a lot. Hire a person with a background that is curious. I think, as we mentioned, that is curious, wants to try things. Talk to the engineering team, and ask your early customers. How did you hear about us? What do you read? What were you thinking? A lot of these things, but every customer we close right now, I ask them, how did you hear about us at some point in the conversation, even if we don't close them, and they're usually pretty straightforward about it, and it's helpful input of where do we invest more? There's some surprises sometimes, but I don't know that there's a perfect place to read because as soon as it's published, everyone's trying it.
Mm. So it kind of dovetails to what Tom said, which is in that phase, I would focus on these 20, 30, 40, 100 early access people that are on your list. I would just focus 120% of your effort making sure that they're happy. And when I look back, we've been around for 5 years now. When I look back at some of the best demand generation efforts that we've done, unknowingly, is making our existing customers happy. And some of them end up generating a lot of entrepreneurial minds. They go on and start their companies, and they refer, that's how the organic referral works. And based on the sound of it, clearly your product holds a very great early promise. So I'll just go and fulfill it first before starting the numbers game.
Yeah, and the other preparation that you can do is you want to have a lot of really great case studies and references when you go to market. And so I think the role shifts now from a demand generation to a product marketing function so that you will have ammunition for your marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely get those logos.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we're out of time for questions, but let's have a big hand of applause for brilliant panelists. Thank you so much.